There's a particular kind of courage that nobody celebrates. Not the courage of a battlefield or a burning building, the kind that makes headlines and earns medals. The quiet courage of a person who continues, who wakes up every morning after the worst thing has happened and makes breakfast and drives to work and smiles at the right moments and carries the wreckage so neatly tucked inside that the people around them never suspect the weight. Denise Acaffer had been practicing that courage for 3 years. 3 years of being the woman who was still standing, still functioning, still raising 2 children in a house that had once been full of a particular man's laugh and is now full of his absence instead. Her friends called her strong. Her co-workers called her remarkable. Her mother-in-law called her once a week, and they talked around the thing neither of them could fully name. What Denise called herself in the private hours was simply still here. She had come to Family Feud because her sister had entered them on a whim 18 months ago, and the call had finally come, and it seemed, as her sister put it, like something to look forward to. Denise was 37 years old, and she had been looking for things to look forward to for 3 years. She said yes. She did not know, when she walked onto that stage, that the afternoon was going to require every reserve of that quiet courage she had spent 3 years building. She did not know that Steve Harvey was going to stop the show and look at her steadily and say 2 words that would undo and remake everything. Look behind you. Denise Acaffer was born Denise Marie Patterson in Charlotte, North Carolina, the second of 4 children raised by a school principal father and a registered nurse mother. She was, by every account from childhood onward, the organized one, the child who kept track of everyone else's permission slips, who remembered the anniversaries, who sent the birthday cards 3 days early. Order was her love language, long before she had the vocabulary for it. She met Daniel Acaffer at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Charlotte when she was 26 and he was 28. Daniel was a structural engineer from Lagos, Nigeria, who had come to the United States for graduate school and had simply never found a sufficient reason to leave. He was precise in his work and expansive in everything else, laughter that arrived suddenly, and filled a room, opinions on food and music and architecture delivered with the confidence of someone who had studied all 3. He called Denise on the phone the morning after they met, not the night, because he had decided that calling the night after was performative and calling the morning after was honest. They were married 2 years later in a ceremony that Denise had planned with characteristic precision and that Daniel had declared in his toast the best organized event he had ever attended, excepting only the moon landing, which he had not personally organized but respected greatly. The audience had laughed. Denise had looked at him across the room and understood, not for the first time, that she had married the right person. They had 2 children, a son named Tobias, now 10, and a daughter named Adiz, now 7. The children were their parents in miniature, Tobias carrying his mother's organizational instincts, Adiz carrying her father's complete inability to enter a room without immediately owning it. 3 years ago, Daniel had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that attacked the peripheral nervous system. The diagnosis had arrived without warning, following a period of increasing fatigue and numbness in his extremities that Daniel had attributed with characteristic optimism to overwork. The condition was serious, progressive, and his specialist explained, not yet well understood. There were treatment protocols. There were clinical trials. There was a great deal of uncertainty presented in the careful, hedged language of medicine when it is operating at the edge of what it knows. Daniel had entered a clinical trial in Atlanta that required him to relocate temporarily 6 weeks in a treatment facility, followed by ongoing monitoring. The trial had shown results in early participants that the medical team described as promising. Daniel described them, in the voice messages he sent Denise every evening, as proof that the universe was not finished with him yet. What the universe had not prepared Denise for was the 6-week silence. 4 weeks into the trial, Daniel's condition had destabilized. The treatment team had made the decision to pause his participation, manage the complication, and reassess. For 3 weeks, Daniel had been in a medical facility in Atlanta, unable to travel, his communication with Denise reduced to brief, careful phone calls during which he worked hard to sound like himself, and she worked equally hard to believe that he was. The children knew their father was in Atlanta for medical treatment. They did not know the full picture. Denise had been managing that boundary with the same precision she brought to everything, answering the questions they asked, and not volunteering the weight of the ones she was carrying alone. She had told her sister, Paulette, most of it. Paulette was the one who had entered them in Family Feud, who had made the calls and filled out the forms and handled the logistics so that Denise would simply need to show up. Paulette operated on the theory that the best thing for her sister right now was forward motion, the next thing, the next hour, the next day. The taping was the next thing. What Paulette had done 3 weeks before the taping date was make a phone call that Denise did not know about. She had called the Family Feud production team and explained in full what the Acaffer family had been going through. She explained about Daniel. She explained about Atlanta. She explained that Daniel had been cleared just the previous week to travel, that his condition had stabilized, that the trial was being cautiously resumed, that he was, in his own words, still here. She had asked whether anything might be possible. The production team had made their own calls. Daniel Acaffer had said, without hesitation, yes. The Acaffer-Patterson family made a formidable 5-person team. Denise, her sister Paulette, Denise's brother Raymond, and 2 of Daniel's cousins who lived in Charlotte, Emeka, and Sade. They were lively, competitive, and deeply fond of one another in the manner of people who have been through something real together and emerged closer for it. Steve Harvey spent the pre-show segment moving through the family with his usual ease, drawing out Emeka's extremely confident claim that he was the most intelligent person in the room, delighting in Sade's immediate and comprehensive rebuttal, finding in Raymond a steady, dry humor that played well against the larger personalities around him. When he reached Denise, his pacing shifted. Not dramatically, anyone watching would have read it as simply a change in gear, the natural modulation of a skilled host. But it was deliberate. "Tell me about your family," Steve said. "You've got your sister here, your brother, some of Daniel's cousins." He paused. "Where's Daniel today?" The question was casual in its delivery. It was not casual in its intention. Denise's expression remained composed. She had been composing herself against this question, or versions of it, for 3 years. "Daniel is in Atlanta," she said. "He's been dealing with some health issues. He's doing better. Dealing with them well." "He's the most optimistic person I've ever met," Denise said. There was something in her voice that was not quite pride and not quite grief, and was, in fact, both of them at once, pressed together into a single tone. "He refuses to lose." Steve looked at her for a moment. "How long have you 2 been married?" 9 years, 9 years, and you'd say he's your person." "Without question," Denise said, simple, immediate. "What do you miss most about having him around?" Pause that followed was very brief, a single breath, but it contained the entirety of 3 years of a particular kind of loneliness. "His laugh," Denise said. "He laughs like it costs him nothing, like there's an unlimited supply." She paused. "I miss that sound in the house." The audience was quiet in a way that audiences get when they recognize truth without ornament. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I want to come back to something after the game. Is that all right?" Denise looked at him carefully. Something in his tone, something in the specific quality of the question. "Of course," she said. The main game proceeded with full energy. The family was excellent. Emeka's overconfidence turned out to be partially justified. Paulette carried a crucial round with 3 correct answers in quick succession, and Denise herself, in the final minutes, delivered the answer that put them over the top. When the win was confirmed, the family embraced in the way that people embrace when the victory means more than the game. Denise held Paulette for a long moment. Paulette, who knew what was backstage, held her back and said nothing. During the post-win celebration, Steve Harvey let the room settle. Then he walked to center stage and faced Denise directly. "I want to go back to what you said earlier," he said. "About Daniel's laugh, about missing that sound in the house." Denise nodded. Her composure was present and intact, but it had a different quality now, the quality of ice that is still solid but has begun in the warmth to change its structure from within. "You've been carrying a lot," Steve said. "Not just today, for a while." "I have 2 children who need their mother to carry it," Denise said, even quiet. "That's true," Steve said, "and you have. Nobody in this room is questioning that." He held her gaze. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to really hear me before you answer." A pause. The studio was completely still. "When is the last time someone carried something for you?" The question arrived the way certain questions do, not as an inquiry, but as a mirror. Denise's composure held for 2 full seconds. Then her eyes filled. She did not cry. She was too practiced for immediate crying, but the tears were present just behind the surface, and everyone in the room could see them gathering. "It's been a while," she said. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her something visible. Steve Harvey looked at her for a long moment. Then he said in a voice that was quieter than his usual register, "Denise, I need you to look behind you." She turned. Daniel Acaffer was standing at the back of the stage. He was thinner than he had been 3 years ago. The condition and its treatment had taken something physical that had not fully returned, but he was standing, upright. In the dark gray suit, he wore the things that mattered, the one Denise had helped him pick out for Tobias's school concert 2 years ago. He had his hands in his pockets in the way he always stood when he was trying to appear more casual than he felt. His face, when Denise turned and found him, broke open completely. Denise made a sound that was not a word. It was not designed or performed. It was the sound a person makes when something they have been holding at a careful distance suddenly becomes real and close and present, and the distance collapses all at once. She crossed the stage. Daniel moved toward her and they met in the middle, and the embrace that followed was the kind that does not resolve itself quickly, both of them holding on with the specific grip of people who have rehearsed, privately and separately, for the possibility that there might not be more of this, and are now confronting the fact that there is. Denise's shoulders, which had been set at the precise angle of a woman managing everything alone, dropped entirely. She buried her face in his neck. Daniel held the back of her head with one hand the way he always had, a gesture so particular and habitual that Denise felt it in the part of herself that had been trying not to need it. The studio audience was standing, not in the orchestrated way of a prompted response, but in the gradual way of 200 people rising because something has moved them past the option of sitting still. Daniel's cousins Emeka and Said were holding each other. Raymond had turned away from the cameras. Paulette stood with both hands pressed flat against her cheeks, watching what she had quietly helped to build. Steve Harvey stood to one side with his arms folded across his chest, his head slightly bowed. He did not speak for nearly a minute. When he did, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of its performance register. "There are moments," Steve said slowly, "that remind you what this platform is actually for, and this is one of them." He paused. "Daniel, I don't know everything you've been through. I know enough to know that getting yourself to this building today took something. And I know that what you just gave your wife, not the money, not the win, what you gave her is something that nobody can manufacture and nobody can replace." He looked at both of them. "You showed up, in the suit. When it was hard, that's the whole thing. That is the whole thing right there." Daniel, still holding Denise's hand, looked at Steve Harvey with the expression of a man who is aware that he is in a television studio and is also simultaneously aware that nothing about this moment is about television. "I told her I would always come back," Daniel said. His voice carried a slight tremor, not from weakness, but from the specific effort of speaking plainly about something enormous. "I needed her to see that I meant it." Denise looked at her husband. Then she laughed, not the polite laugh of a woman managing an audience, but the real laugh, sudden and full, the laugh of someone who has found, in the middle of a very hard thing, something that is genuinely, completely funny in its relief. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder and laughed, and then, finally, after 3 years of practicing composure, she cried. The audience did not need prompting. Neither did Steve Harvey. He waited until the moment had completed itself on its own terms. Then he turned to the cameras and said, "This right here, this is why we do what we do." The episode aired on a Thursday evening in February. By the following morning, the clip had been viewed 41 million times, the most viewed moment in Family Feud's digital history at the time of broadcast. What distinguished the response was its specificity. The comment sections and shared posts were not filled with the generic language of viral sentiment. They were filled with particular stories. People who had sat in hospital waiting rooms. People who had learned to sleep on one side of a bed that used to hold two. People who knew the sound of a specific laugh in a specific house and understood, viscerally, what it meant to miss it. The clip traveled not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because it was precise. It named something that millions of people were living through without language for it. Daniel's medical team in Atlanta issued a brief, carefully worded statement noting that their patient's participation in the clinical trial was ongoing and that his prognosis, while not without uncertainty, was meaningfully improved from 12 months prior. The statement used no names. Everyone who needed to know understood who it referred to. In the months following the episode's airing, the Akafor family navigated the ongoing reality of Daniel's condition with the pragmatic tenderness of people who have stopped taking the ordinary days for granted. Daniel returned to Charlotte full-time 4 months after the taping, his trial protocol having shifted to outpatient monitoring. He worked reduced hours from home. Denise adjusted her schedule. They hired help for the first time, a decision that Denise, who had been managing everything alone for 3 years, found both practically necessary and privately difficult. The admission of limitation always costs something, even when it is the correct decision. What changed in the ways that mattered most was harder to quantify. Denise began seeing a therapist, something she had postponed for 2 years on the grounds that she was managing fine and others needed the resource more. She was managing fine. She was also, her therapist helped her see, managing in ways that had foreclosed on certain kinds of help and connection, keeping people at the precise distance required to maintain the appearance of solidity. She began, carefully and then with increasing confidence, to let that distance shrink, Tobias and Adiz saw the episode when it aired. Denise had decided, after long thought and a conversation with Daniel, that they were old enough to see it, and that shielding them from the full picture of what the family had been through was no longer serving anyone. Tobias watched the reunion with the focused attention of a 10-year-old who is taking careful note of something he wants to remember. Adiz, 7, watched her parents embrace on the screen and then immediately climbed into Daniel's lap and stayed there for the rest of the episode, one hand on his chest in the specific, proprietary way of a child who is not taking any chances. Daniel told Adiz when she asked why Mummy was crying on television that sometimes crying was what happened when something you had missed very much came back. Adiz considered this. She asked if Mummy had missed Daddy. Daniel said yes. She said she had missed him too. He said he knew. She said that in the future, could he please not go away for that long? He said he would do his best. She said that wasn't good enough. She needed a real answer. He laughed, the laugh that filled the room, the one Denise had described on stage, the one that apparently cost him nothing, and said he promised. Adiz accepted this and returned to her dinner. Steve Harvey referenced the Ackhafer family in an interview 6 months after the episode aired, when he was asked about the most memorable moments from his years of hosting. He said that what stayed with him was not the surprise itself, but the specific thing Denise had said before it, that Daniel laughed like there was an unlimited supply. He said, "That's how you know someone loves another person, when they can identify the exact sound of them, the particular quality of something no one else has. That tells you everything." On the 1-year anniversary of the taping, Denise posted a single photograph on her social media, her and Daniel at their kitchen table, morning light, coffee cups, the ordinary furniture of a life being continued. The caption read, "Still here." The post received 200,000 responses. She read none of them and all of them in the way of someone who has learned that being witnessed, even by strangers, is not the same as being alone. Daniel framed the Family Feud win check, modest in dollar terms, large in every other sense, and hung it in his home office beside a photograph of himself and Tobias at a Charlotte Hornets game from the year before his diagnosis. Not as a monument to difficulty, as evidence that the story was still going, that the chapters were accumulating, that the man in the gray suit had meant what he said when he told his wife he would always come back. He was still coming back, every morning. That was the whole thing. That was, as Steve Harvey had said on the stage in Atlanta with the cameras running and the audience standing, and a woman laughing and crying at the same time in her husband's arms, the whole thing right there.